When 16-year-old Barron Trump made the simple decision to give up his first-class seat to a Navy veteran at JFK Airport, he never expected it to become the catalyst for a chain of events that would leave everyone on Flight 283 speechless. From uncovering decades-old war stories to a tearful reunion between strangers whose lives were unknowingly intertwined, what unfolded at 30,000 feet became a testament to the power of human kindness. But the most jaw-dropping revelation came at the very end. A sealed letter that connected this small act of generosity to a hidden legacy stretching back 50 years. It all started on a day when Barron Trump tried to hide a yawn as he walked through JFK Airport's Terminal 4. It was only 6:30 in the morning, but the huge building was already buzzing with travelers. The morning sun streamed through the tall windows, making patterns on the shiny floor. Even though he had flown hundreds of times before, airports still made him feel small. "This way, Mr. Trump," said Mike, the head of his security team. Mike was built like a football player and had a kind face that could turn serious in a second. He guided Barron through the crowd, keeping close but trying not to draw attention. Barron appreciated how Mike and the other security members tried to help him feel normal. Being 16 wasn't easy for anyone, but being the son of a famous person made everything more complicated. He adjusted his backpack and followed Mike toward the first-class lounge. The smell of coffee and fresh-baked cookies filled the air as they passed a cafe. Barron's stomach growled, reminding him that he had skipped breakfast in the rush to make their early flight. A little girl pointed at him and whispered to her mother. He was used to that by now and gave them a small wave, which made the girls smile. "We have 45 minutes before boarding," Mike said, checking his watch. "Would you like to get something to eat?" Before Barron could answer, something caught his eye. An elderly man in a worn leather jacket was standing near the waiting area. What made Barron notice him was the Navy veteran's cap he wore, decorated with medals and pins that sparkled in the morning light. The man was leaning heavily on a wooden cane, looking around for an empty seat. All the chairs were taken by people absorbed in their phones or laptops. The veteran's hands trembled slightly as he gripped his cane tighter. His face showed no complaint, but Barron could tell he was tired. A memory flashed through his mind, his mother's voice from last week. Having privilege means having the power to help others. Sometimes the smallest gestures make the biggest difference. Barron watched as person after person looked up, saw the veteran, then looked back down at their screens. His chest felt tight. The man reminded him of his grandfather, who had told him stories about serving in the military. Those stories had taught Barron about sacrifice and courage. Mike noticed Barron had stopped walking. "Everything okay?" "That man needs a seat," Barron said quietly. "He's a veteran." Mike followed his gaze and nodded slowly. "Yes, he is. Navy, from the looks of his cap." The veteran shifted his weight, and Barron saw him wince. Without thinking, Barron started walking toward him, but Mike gently caught his arm. "Remember the security protocols," Mike said softly. "We need to be careful about approaching strangers." Barron understood the concern. His whole life had been shaped by security measures and careful planning. But something inside him wouldn't let him just walk away. He thought about all the times he had sat in comfortable first-class lounges while others waited in crowded terminals. "He served our country," Barron whispered. "We can't just leave him standing there." A group of business people hurried past, their rolling suitcases clicking against the floor. The noise of the terminal seemed to grow louder. Announcements echoing overhead, phones ringing, children crying, and hundreds of conversations blending together. But Barron stayed focused on the veteran, who was now trying to bend down to get something from his bag while balancing on his cane. That's when Barron made a decision. He had a first-class ticket in his pocket and access to the comfortable lounge where he usually waited for flights. He had cushy seats and free snacks waiting for him. But right now, none of that felt right. "Mike," he said, standing straighter, "I need to help him. We can do a security check first, but I have to do something." Mike studied Barron's face for a moment. In his eyes, Barron saw recognition. This wasn't about getting attention or making a scene. This was about doing what was right. After 7 years of working with Barron, Mike knew when the teenager was serious. "Okay," Mike said, touching his earpiece to alert the rest of the security team. "Let's do this properly." Barron felt his heart beating faster as they approached the veteran. He wasn't sure exactly what he was going to do yet, but he knew he had to help. As they got closer, he could read some of the pins on the veteran's cap. Vietnam, Purple Heart, Navy Cross. This man had given so much for his country. The least Barron could do was give something in return. What he didn't know was that this simple decision would set off a chain of events that would change not only his day, but the lives of everyone on Flight 283 to Los Angeles. Sometimes the biggest adventures start with the smallest choices, and Barron Trump's airport morning was about to become much more interesting than he ever expected. As Barron walked toward the veteran, his mother's words from their last family dinner echoed in his mind. They had been talking about his upcoming solo flight to visit his school friends in Los Angeles. "Remember, Barron," she had said in her gentle accent, setting down her fork, "people will always watch what you do. But what matters is who you are when you think no one is watching." Now, standing just a few feet from the veteran, Barron realized this wasn't about being watched. It was about doing what felt right in his heart. "Excuse me, sir," Barron said politely. The veteran looked up, his blue eyes sharp and alert despite his tired appearance. "I noticed you're looking for a seat." The veteran straightened up as much as his back would allow. "Don't worry about me, young man. I've stood through worse." He smiled, revealing laugh lines around his eyes. "Name's James Wilson, former Navy pilot. It's nice to meet you, Mr. Wilson." "I'm Barron." He left off his last name, but something in James's expression told him the veteran had already recognized him. Mike and the security team had formed a casual circle around them, trying to look natural while keeping watch. Other passengers were starting to notice, some pulling out their phones. "I served on the USS Enterprise," James said, shifting his weight on the cane. "Flew F-4 Phantoms in Vietnam. Not as fancy as today's jets, but she got the job done." Barron's eyes widened. He had just read about F-4 Phantoms in his history class. "That's amazing, sir. Those planes were incredible." James's face lit up at Barron's genuine interest. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a worn leather wallet. Inside was a faded photograph of a much younger James standing proudly next to his aircraft. "That's my girl," James said fondly. "Flew 63 missions in her." His hand trembled slightly as he held the photo, and Barron noticed him leaning more heavily on his cane. Without hesitation, Barron pulled his first-class ticket from his pocket. "Mr. Wilson, I'd be honored if you'd take my seat in first class." James's eyes widened. "Oh no, son. I couldn't possibly—" "Please," Barron insisted. "You've done so much for our country. It's just a seat on a plane, but it would mean a lot to me." Mike stepped forward, ready to handle any security concerns, but he saw the genuine connection between the teenager and the veteran. He gave a subtle nod to his team. "Son," James said, his voice growing thick with emotion, "I appreciate the offer, but I'll be fine in coach," Barron said with a smile. "Really? My mom always says comfort means more to those who've earned it." An older woman sitting nearby had been watching the entire exchange. She wore a simple gray sweater and had been typing on a laptop, but now she closed it slowly, her eyes never leaving Barron and James. Something about her intense interest made Barron curious, but he focused on James. Finally, James nodded. "Thank you, Barron. Your parents raised you right." As they walked together toward the ticket counter to arrange the swap, Barron noticed more phones pointing their way. He was used to being photographed, but this felt different. This wasn't about him being a Trump. It was about being human. The ticket agent quickly processed the exchange, her eyes darting between Barron and James with a warm smile. As she handed them their new boarding passes, she said, "Flight 283 will begin boarding in 20 minutes. What none of them knew was that the mysterious woman in the gray sweater had also booked a seat on Flight 283. She pulled out her phone and made a quick call, speaking too softly for anyone to hear. "Kate, you won't believe what I just witnessed. Change of plans. I'm going to Los Angeles. I think I just found the missing piece for our project." As Barron helped James get settled in the first-class lounge, he felt a happiness that had nothing to do with flying or comfort. But he had no idea that this simple act of kindness was about to become part of something much bigger than himself. Something that would remind all of America about the power of looking out for each other. The first-class lounge was quiet compared to the busy terminal outside. Soft music played through hidden speakers, and the smell of fresh coffee mixed with warm pastries filled the air. James sank into one of the plush leather chairs with a grateful sigh. "Can I get you something to drink, sir?" a lounge attendant asked James. "Just water, thank you," James replied, carefully placing his cane against the chair. He turned to Barron, who was standing nearby. "Please, sit with me for a bit. That is, if your security detail allows it." Mike nodded, and Barron took the seat across from James. The mysterious woman in the gray sweater had also entered the lounge, choosing a seat near the window where she could observe them while pretending to read a magazine. "You remind me of my grandson," James said, pulling out his wallet again. This time he showed Barron a photo of a teenage boy in a baseball uniform. "Tommy, he's about your age." "Does he play baseball?" Barron asked, genuinely interested. James's face brightened. "Pitcher for his high school team. Takes after his grandmother. She was quite the athlete." His voice softened. "She passed last year. This is actually my first time flying without her." Barron felt a lump in his throat. "I'm sorry about your wife." "Margaret was something special," James said, straightening one of his medals. "She's the reason I'm on this flight, actually. We always talked about visiting the Pacific War Museum in Los Angeles together. Promised her I'd go, even if I had to go alone." From her spot by the window, the woman in gray typed something quickly on her phone, her eyes glistening with unexpected tears. "Tell me about flying the F-4, Barron said, sensing James needed to talk about happier memories. What was it like being a pilot? For the next 20 minutes, James shared stories that made history come alive. He described the roar of the engines, the feeling of breaking the sound barrier, and the brotherhood among his fellow pilots. But it wasn't all exciting adventures. He also spoke about losing friends and the weight of responsibility that came with each mission. "The hardest part wasn't the flying," James said, his voice growing serious. "It was watching young men, boys really, facing things no one should have to face. But you know what got us through?" Barron leaned forward. "What?" "Looking out for each other. Small acts of kindness. Sharing a last cookie from a care package. Trading radio shifts so someone could sleep a little longer." James gestured at the comfortable lounge around them. "Kind of like what you did today." The woman in gray had moved closer, pretending to get coffee while listening intently. "I didn't do it to be kind," Barron said honestly. "I did it because it was right." James smiled. That's the best kind of kindness, the kind that comes naturally. Over the lounge speakers, an announcement crackled. Attention passengers of Flight 283 to Los Angeles. We will begin pre-boarding in 5 minutes for passengers needing extra assistance. That's me, James said, reaching for his cane. As he stood, he swayed slightly. Barron jumped up to steady him. Are you okay? Just a bit dizzy. Happens sometimes, since the surgery last month. Doctor said it would take time to get my sea legs back. James tried to laugh it off, but Barron could see the concern in Mike's eyes. Sir, Mike stepped forward, would you like me to arrange for wheelchair assistance? James shook his head firmly. Thank you, but no. A Marine helped me learn to walk again after I was shot down. Promised him I'd keep walking as long as I could. The woman in gray was now openly watching them, her magazine forgotten. She wiped a tear from her cheek, then quickly turned away when Barron glanced in her direction. As they walked toward the gate, James told Barron about the Marine, a young man named Charlie Martinez who had spent months helping injured veterans learn to walk again. Never gave up on any of us. Said every step we took was a victory. What James didn't know was that among the papers in the woman's laptop bag was a photograph of a young Marine physical therapist named Charles Martinez, taken in 1971 at a veterans hospital in San Diego. At the gate, more passengers were noticing Barron and James. Some were taking pictures, others were whispering, but neither of them paid attention. They were too absorbed in their conversation about James's grandson's upcoming baseball championship. Window or aisle? Barron asked as they prepared to board. Window, James smiled. Old habits die hard. Always liked having a good view of the world below. As the pre-boarding announcement repeated, James turned serious. Barron, I want you to know something. What you did today, giving up your seat, it means more than you know. Not because of the comfort, but because you saw me as a person, not just an old veteran who needed help. Barron felt his ears turn red. Anyone would have done the same. No, James said softly. They wouldn't. And that's what makes it special. The woman in gray had moved to stand right behind them in the boarding line, her phone held ready as if to capture something important. But what she was really recording wasn't just a teenager's act of kindness or a veteran's gratitude. She was documenting something far more rare, a moment that would soon connect dozens of lives in ways none of them could imagine. Now boarding Group 1 for Flight 283 to Los Angeles, the gate agent announced. First class and priority passengers may board at this time. James fumbled with his new first-class boarding pass, still not quite believing he was about to fly in the front of the plane. Barron noticed his slightly shaking hands and stepped forward. Here, let me help you with your bag, Mr. Wilson, he offered, reaching for the worn military duffel. The woman in gray quietly pressed a button on her phone, continuing to record. A small red light blinked steadily in her hand. As James and Barron approached the gate, the agent's eyes widened in recognition. She looked at the boarding passes, then at Barron, clearly confused about why he was holding a coach ticket. Is everything all right? She asked. Yes, ma'am, James spoke up. This young man insisted I take his first-class seat. Wouldn't take no for an answer. Pride filled his voice, though Barron could tell he was still a bit embarrassed about accepting such a generous offer. The gate agent's face softened. Well, that's certainly not something you see every day. She scanned their tickets and handed them back. Have a wonderful flight, gentlemen. As they started down the jet bridge, a young girl tugged on her mother's sleeve. Mom, isn't that the president's son? Why isn't he sitting in first class? Sometimes, the mother replied, loud enough for Barron to hear. The richest things in life have nothing to do with money. The woman in gray smiled at this, typing something quickly into her phone before following them down the jet bridge. Inside the plane, the flight attendants were preparing for boarding. Their practiced smiles turned to looks of surprise as they saw Barron helping James store his bag in the first-class overhead compartment. "Sir, would you like a pre-flight beverage?" A flight attendant named Sarah asked James. "Just water, thank you," James replied, settling into his window seat. He ran his hand along the soft leather armrest. "Margaret would have loved this," he whispered, so quietly that only Barron heard him. The woman in gray took her seat across the aisle from James, pretending to be absorbed in her laptop while her phone continued recording. Something about the way she watched them made Barron curious. But before he could think more about it, Mike touched his shoulder. "We should head to our seats in coach," he said gently. "They'll be boarding the rest of the plane soon." Barron nodded, but James caught his arm. "Thank you again, son. You've made an old pilot very happy today." As Barron and his security team made their way to the back of the plane, whispers followed them. People were pointing at their phones, showing each other something. A few passengers smiled and nodded at him with respect. "Looks like someone posted about what happened at the gate," Mike murmured. "It's already getting attention online." Barron felt his face flush. He hadn't done it for attention. He just wanted to help. But as he reached his seat in coach, row 23B, something unexpected happened. A middle-aged man stood up from the aisle seat. "I saw what you did for that veteran," he said. "My dad served in Vietnam too. Would you like the aisle seat? Might be more comfortable than the middle." "Oh, no, thank you," Barron started to say, but the man insisted. "Please, let me do something." Kind, too. Up in first class, the woman in gray was showing something on her laptop to James. Her eyes were bright with tears, but she was smiling. James's face had gone pale, as if he'd seen something that shook him to his core. As the rest of the passengers boarded, a flight attendant named Mark passed through the coach cabin with a clipboard. He stopped at Barron's row. "Mr. Trump," he said quietly. "Several passengers in first class have offered to trade their seats with you. They were quite insistent." Barron shook his head. "Thank you, but I'm fine here." "Really?" Mark nodded, impressed. "Your seat swap with Mr. Wilson, it's already got over 10,000 shares online. People are calling it the first-class switch." But what no one on the plane knew yet was that this story was about to become much more than a viral moment of kindness. The woman in gray had plans that would turn this 6-hour flight into something none of them would ever forget. As the cabin door closed with a heavy thunk, she pulled an envelope from her laptop bag. Inside was a photograph so old its edges had turned yellow. It showed a group of young Navy pilots standing in front of their F-4 Phantoms. And there, in the center of the photo, was a face that would soon change everything about this flight. Plane rumbled down the runway, engines roaring as it lifted into the morning sky. James pressed his face close to the window, watching New York City shrink beneath them. His fingers traced the small wings pin on his jacket, a nervous habit he'd had since his flying days. In coach, Barron pulled out his history textbook. They were studying the Vietnam War era, and after meeting James, the black and white photos in the book seemed more real than ever. He thought about the young men in those pictures, wondering how many of them had stories like James's. The woman in gray waited until the seatbelt sign turned off. Then, with trembling hands, she pulled out the old photograph again. She studied the faces of the young pilots, particularly the one in the center, a handsome young man with a confident smile and lieutenant's bars on his collar. "Excuse me," she said softly to James. I couldn't help but overhear earlier that you flew F-4 Phantoms in Vietnam. James turned from the window. Yes, ma'am. With VF-96, the Fighting Falcons. The woman's eyes widened. She glanced down at the photograph, then back at James. Would you mind looking at something? In coach, the man next to Barron was showing him pictures on his phone. My dad flew helicopters in Vietnam, he explained. Rescued downed pilots. He never talked much about it, but he kept this logbook. He held up his phone, displaying a weathered page filled with dates and notes. Barron leaned closer, fascinated. Did he ever rescue any F-4 pilots? Dozens, the man replied. Said those Phantom jockeys were the bravest guys he knew, always trying to protect the other pilots, even when they were shot up themselves. Up in first class, James took the photograph with careful hands. The moment he saw it, his face went pale. Where did you get this? He whispered. The woman leaned closer. Do you recognize anyone? James's fingers shook as he pointed to the young man in the center. That's Charlie Martinez. The Marine who helped you learn to walk again? The woman asked softly. James looked at her sharply. How did you know about that? Before she could answer, the plane hit a patch of turbulence. The photograph slipped from James's hands, floating down the aisle. A flight attendant caught it and brought it back. Thank you, the woman said, but James was staring at her now with new intensity. Who are you? He asked. Why do you have this picture? In coach. Barron felt the tension in the air, even though he couldn't see what was happening in first class. The man next to him was still talking about his father's rescue missions. Dad said his proudest moment was saving a pilot who'd been shot down trying to protect his wingman. The guy's legs were pretty badly hurt, but he refused treatment until they looked for his friend. Barron sat up straighter. Something about that story seemed familiar. Back in first class, the woman took a deep breath. My name is Catherine Martinez, she said quietly. Charlie was my father. James grabbed his armrest so hard his knuckles turned white. Charlie had a daughter. Catherine nodded, tears in her eyes. He never stopped talking about the KIB pilots he helped, especially one who gave him hope during the darkest days of his career. A pilot who'd lost the use of his legs but fought every day to walk again, who inspired other injured veterans to keep trying. James's eyes filled with tears. I didn't know. I lost touch with Charlie after the war. Tried to find him years later, but he passed away last year, Catherine said gently. But before he died, he made me promise to finish his project. Project? Catherine pulled out her laptop. Dad spent years documenting acts of kindness between veterans. He believed that the spirit of looking out for each other, the same spirit that kept him going in Vietnam, was still alive. He wanted to show that to the world. The plane cruised steadily above the clouds now, 30,000 feet over America. Sunlight streamed through the windows, catching the medals on James's jacket. When I saw what happened in the terminal, Catherine continued, watching that young man give up his seat for you, it was exactly what Dad always talked about. The same spirit of sacrifice and kindness he saw in the war, alive in the next generation. James looked back at the photograph. Charlie saved more than just my legs, you know. He saved my hope, my belief in humanity. The photograph showed Charlie standing proudly with his unit, but it was the note scribbled on the back that made James's hands shake. To my brother James, keep walking, keep believing. The world needs more people willing to lift others up. Charlie. What James didn't know was that Barron had just heard the helicopter pilot's son tell almost the exact same story. And what none of them realized was that this flight was about to bring together more than just a veteran and his old friend's daughter. It was about to show America that the greatest acts of kindness often come full circle in ways we never expect. Catherine Martinez unbuckled her seatbelt and stood up. "Mr. Wilson, would you mind if I shared something with the other passengers? I think they need to hear this story." James nodded slowly, still processing the revelation about Charlie's daughter. Catherine walked to the front of the first class cabin and spoke quietly with the lead flight attendant, Sarah. After a moment, Sarah's face lit up. She picked up the intercom phone. "Ladies and gentlemen, we have something special to share with you today. One of our passengers would like to tell you a story, if you'll all lend her your attention." In coach, Barron stopped reading his history book. The man next to him, who had introduced himself as Tom Richards, put away his phone with the helicopter rescue photos. Catherine's voice came clear through the cabin speakers. "My name is Catherine Martinez, and I'm a documentary filmmaker. But today, I'm here because of a promise I made to my father." She held up the old photograph so the first-class passengers could see it. This was taken in Vietnam, 1971. The man in the center is my father, Charlie Martinez. He was a Marine who worked with injured pilots and soldiers, helping them recover and walk again. In row 23, Tom Richards suddenly sat up straight. "Martinez," he whispered. "Did she say Charlie Martinez?" Barron turned to him. "What is it?" "That's the name in my dad's logbook. The Marine who helped the pilot my dad rescued." Tom's voice shook with emotion. "Up front," Catherine continued, "one of the pilots my father helped was on this flight today. Mr. James Wilson learned to walk again because my father refused to let him give up. And today, I watched as another kind of healing happened. When a young man gave up his first-class seat to make sure Mr. Wilson could fly in comfort." Passengers began turning in their seats, looking for Barron. He sank lower, his face red, but Tom patted his shoulder proudly. "But there's more to this story," Catherine said. "The helicopter pilot who rescued Mr. Wilson that day in Vietnam, the one who got him to safety so my father could help him walk again, his name was Captain David Richards." Tom jumped to his feet. "That's my dad." The entire plane went quiet. Sarah, the flight attendant, hurried back to Tom's row. "Sir, would you like to come to the front?" Barron watched as Tom practically ran up the aisle, tears streaming down his face. Catherine was crying too as she hugged him. James Wilson stared at them both in disbelief. "Your father," James's voice cracked. "Your father pulled me out of the jungle. I never knew his name. He risked everything to save me." "Dad said it was the mission he'd never forget," Tom said. "The pilot who wouldn't leave without making sure his wingman was safe." More passengers were crying now. An elderly woman in row 12 stood up. "My brother was a phantom pilot too. He didn't make it home, but he always wrote about how the pilots looked out for each other." A young girl, maybe 7 years old, walked up to Barron's row. "Did you really give up your seat just to be nice?" Barron nodded, embarrassed by the attention. "Mr. Wilson deserved it more than me." The girl smiled. "That's what my mom says about kindness, that it's like throwing a rock in a pond. The ripples keep going and going." Catherine wiped her eyes and raised the intercom again. "This is exactly what my father's project was about. He spent years collecting stories of kindness between veterans, believing that these connections never really end. They just wait for the right moment to surface." She pulled out her laptop and opened it. "I've been working to finish his documentary. It's called Full Circle. the ripples of kindness in war and peace. And today, on this flight, I watched his theory come true, in ways even he couldn't have imagined. Sarah brought James a glass of water. His hands were shaking as he took it. "Charlie never gave up on any of us," he said, his voice carrying through the quiet cabin. He said kindness was a form of courage, that helping others heal helped us heal too. A teenager across the aisle raised his hand. "My school is doing a project on Vietnam veterans. Would you mind telling us more?" For the next hour, as the plane cruised over America's heartland, James shared stories of bravery and brotherhood. Tom talked about his father's rescue missions. Catherine played clips from interviews she'd done with other veterans for the documentary. Barron listened, spellbound, as history came alive around him. His simple decision to give up a seat had somehow uncovered all these connections, these threads of kindness stretching back through time. What no one knew yet was that Catherine had been recording everything. This flight, this remarkable chain of events, would become the final chapter of her father's documentary. But there was still one more surprise waiting to be revealed, one final connection that would leave everyone on Flight 283 forever changed. As the plane began its descent into Los Angeles, Catherine reached into her laptop bag one more time. She pulled out another envelope, this one sealed and marked with her father's handwriting. "For James Wilson, to be opened when the circle is complete." The pilot's voice crackled over the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we're beginning our final descent into Los Angeles. Please return to your seats and fasten your seatbelts." James stared at the envelope in Catherine's hands, his heart pounding. Charlie's handwriting was exactly as he remembered it, bold and steady, just like the man himself. "He wrote this before he died," Catherine explained softly. "Said I'd know when it was time to deliver it." She handed the envelope to James. "I think this is the moment he was waiting for." With trembling fingers, James broke the seal. Inside was a letter and another photograph, this one in color, taken just a few years ago. It showed an older Charlie standing in front of the Pacific War Museum in Los Angeles, the very place James was traveling to visit. "Read it out loud," Catherine whispered. "Please." James cleared his throat and began to read. "Dear James, if you're reading this, it means two things. I'm no longer here, and my daughter Catherine has witnessed something extraordinary, something that proved what I've always believed, that true kindness never dies. It just waits for the right moment to bloom again. I've spent years documenting stories of how one person's kindness can change lives. But there's one story I never told, one that changed everything for me. The day you refused to give up, the day you took those first steps after everyone said you'd never walk again. That wasn't just about your recovery. You see, I was ready to quit my job at the hospital that week. The war had left me hollow inside, but watching you fight to walk again, seeing your determination to help other injured pilots, even when you could barely stand, you saved me, James. Every veteran I helped after you, every life I touched, it was because you showed me that healing was possible. That kindness could bridge any gap, heal any wound. If Catherine has given you this letter, it means she's seen that same spirit alive in the world today. And knowing my daughter, she's probably captured it all on camera. James had to pause, wiping his eyes. The entire cabin was silent, listening. "There's more," Catherine encouraged gently. James continued reading. "I have one last request, old friend. The Pacific War Museum has agreed to host the premiere of Catherine's documentary. I've arranged everything. They're waiting for you, all of you. Because your story isn't just about Vietnam or about veterans. It's about how kindness connects us all, across generations, across time. Look around you, James. I bet you're not alone right now. I bet there are people on that plane who understand exactly what I'm talking about. Keep walking, brother. Keep believing. And most importantly, keep sharing the story. With eternal gratitude, Charlie P.S. Tell whoever showed you kindness today that they've just become part of something bigger than themselves. They're proof that the spirit we fought to protect is still alive and well. The plane grew quiet, except for the sound of sniffles and quiet tears. Then, from somewhere in coach, a small voice spoke up. "What's at the museum?" Catherine smiled through her tears. "My father spent the last year of his life working with the museum to create a new exhibition. It's called The Kindness of Strangers, From Battlefield to Home." The premiere of our documentary will open the exhibit. Sarah, the flight attendant, made an announcement. "Ladies and gentlemen, the Pacific War Museum has just informed us that they're offering free admission to everyone on this flight for the premiere tonight. They say we're all part of the story now." As the plane touched down in Los Angeles, Barron finally understood. His simple act of giving up his seat hadn't just helped one veteran. It had completed a circle of kindness that began over 50 years ago in Vietnam. The passengers applauded as James stood up, steady on his feet, a living testament to Charlie's belief in the power of kindness. Tom Richards hugged him, both men crying openly now. "Dad would have loved this," Tom whispered. Catherine turned to Barron, who had come up to the front with the other passengers. "You know, when I set out to finish my father's documentary, I thought I was just telling stories from the past. But you showed us all that kindness isn't just history. It's alive. It's right here." That evening, as hundreds of people filled the Pacific War Museum for the premiere, James Wilson stood at the podium. Next to him was Barron Trump, looking slightly embarrassed but proud. Behind them was a huge screen showing Charlie Martinez's smiling face. "Charlie once told me that kindness is like a torch," James said to the crowd. "Each person who carries it lights the way for others." Today, on Flight 283, I watched that torch pass to a new generation. And as the lights dimmed and Catherine's documentary began to play, everyone in the room understood what Charlie Martinez had known all along, that sometimes the greatest moments in history aren't the big events that make headlines, but the small acts of kindness that ripple through time, connecting strangers, healing old wounds, and reminding us all what it means to be human. But speaking of unforgettable moments, imagine this. A homeless man stops Barron Trump on the street and asks for just $1. What Barron does next will leave you speechless. It's a response no one could have predicted. Click on the video appearing on your screen right now to uncover the shocking twist in this incredible story. Don't miss it. You have to see it to believe it.